here on this wonderful Friday night. I know we all have some other things we might like to go do, but this is really important, and I think you all probably feel the same way. Ammon is, I guess for me, he's kind of special. I've known him for quite some time. I was part of something called the State Jefferson movement, trying to rescue part of California. Yes, I'm a transplant, I'm sorry. But he tried to help us, kind of guide us through that process. I always thought if the opportunity came for me to help him out in later stages in life or whatever, and I never thought really it would be this, but I truly think God has kind of directed me, one, to hear, and two, to him, and to help him with this. And he probably will feel the same way. But I could kind of run on about all of this, but really, kind of keep this in mind when you listen. We have a lot of potential candidates out there for governor. We really only have one that's going to exact change and really try and stop what's trying to be done here in our state. And it's Ammon Bundy. So please give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I hope they had a good conversation and leave here with a little bit better understanding about each other. And ask a question. Who here have moved in the last 10 years? So what about the last 5? Okay, that's pretty good. Do I dare to ask who's moved here from the West Coast then? Okay, that's a pretty good amount of you. Did you move here fleeing from what was going on over there?
Yes, sure.
Double hand right there. And so, are you concerned that that's going to come here?
Yes.
Or that is?
Yeah.
And where, if it comes to Idaho, where are you going to go?
This is the Alamo.
This is it.
This is the beachhead, maybe.
This is the stand.
Well, so I'm in good company, because that's how I feel. I'm certainly not alone. But what are we talking here? We're talking about the reality of literally our world collapsing around us, and us looking for a way to just live free, to be left alone, to be able to worship how we want to worship, to be able to trade with each other, and to be able to have the really good things in life that our parents had, our grandparents had, our great-grandparents had, our great-great-grandparents had. Not that they didn't have struggles. We all know they struggled. We all know they had challenges. You know, they're a lot different than our day-to-day challenges. My great-great-grandfather, Abraham Bundy, he was, a farmer in Kansas. And, at times he did okay. Other times they almost starved to death, right? But they were very free to do that. And, they had to connect their work and their ideas and with the land, and they had to produce, and it was theirs, and they kept it. And they built their homes, and they built their communities, and they did it off of what they felt was theirs to do. And then I look on the other side, my great-great-grandfather actually went on a Christian mission to England. And he spent 9 months in a very cold English prison, rock prison, and in his journals, it just talks over and over how cold they were, how they thought they were gonna die of hypothermia, and they, you know, he doesn't use those terms, but basically they were freezing to death in those prisons. And you know what his crime was? Any idea?
Speaking out against King.
Preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ without a license.
Without a license.
Yeah, without a license. Preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ without a license.
Great story.
Isn't that amazing to think about?
Yeah.
So, you know, I got one side that's just as free as can be, in this country, prospering and building this great foundation that we still benefit from today. I mean, we are still riding on the coattails of the wealth that was built in the days when people were really free. Right? We benefit from that still today. And we're starting to see the momentum of that come to a stop. But they built up such a momentum, and there was so much freedom and so much wealth because of the freedom and prosperity and so much spirit of freedom, and that it charged for over 100 years. Even though really the last 100 years in many instances have been more tyrannical, and the momentum has slowed down, and now we're kind of toward the tail end of it. We have a decision. We have we have to decide, at least in Idaho, I don't know what else everybody else is going to decide, but are we going to charge that up again? Are we going to get it going again?
Re-engage it.
Are we going to re-engage it? And are we going to do the same things that they did, apply the same principles that they did, so that our grandchildren will be able to say that we were free and we benefit from that freedom? Are we going to do that? I hope we will, right? Because we do have the opportunity here in Idaho to do that. We do. We really do. And so, I look at the contrast, and then of course my great-great-grandfather on my grandmother's side, he ended up getting out. I don't know how they got out or whatever happened, but nine months for preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ without a license. And then you know what they did when they got out? They preached the gospel of Jesus Christ without a license. And he got thrown in again. But this time it was only 5 days. And he did that for 3 years. And then he came back to America and participated in the great freedom that was here. And the contrast was so clear. It was so clear to him. And he could see very clearly why 100 years or so prior that we fought an a revolutionary war for independence. Because the people in this country were not, in this land, I should say, were not going to live under a government that wanted to put you in prison for 9 months for preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ without a license. And in fact, it was so important to them that in the First Amendment they put the very first line, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Right? And in Idaho, it was so important that in the first article, section 4, they put it in there, the exercise and enjoyment of religious faith and worship shall forever be guaranteed, and no person shall be denied any civil or political right, privilege, or capacity on the account of his religious opinions. Okay, pretty good terminology, both in our U.S. Constitution and in the state constitution. And then we look at where we're at today. Right, where are we at today? Idaho. Did you know that Idaho was the first state in the United States to have somebody arrested for going to church?
That's amazing.
Moscow, Idaho.
Oh, yeah.
You remember that? The very first, imagine what that is. Imagine the path that all of a sudden now we're going down. I mean, that's what we fought against. That's what was going on. That's what happens in other countries. That doesn't happen in the United States. And it certainly doesn't happen in Idaho. But it did. And you know what? A sheriff down there, who actually I have a lot of respect for, believe it or not. He went and did the bidding of the city. Put them in their jail. And not contemplating, not understanding, like, what are you doing? Do you realize that this hasn't happened in this country for 230 years? And now you're arresting people for going to church. What are you doing? What are we doing? We have to wake up. You didn't flee to Idaho for Idaho to be the first state to arrest somebody for the very protected right in the very first line of the Bill of Rights. Right?
Right.
That's not why we came to Idaho. That's not what Idaho is about. What is Idaho about?
Freedom.
Just the opposite, right? It's about freedom. It's about liberty. It's about rugged individualism. It's about doing what you want to do as long as you don't harm your neighbors. Right? It's about being able to build on your property, use your property, enjoy your property. It's about being able to worship God how you want to worship God, when you want to worship God, where you want to worship God. It's about being able to trade freely with each other. Being able to use the resources of the earth, which is where all the wealth comes from. Because that's the way God made it. Do you realize the increase? I have a little apple orchard. I can take one seed and I could plant it, and within a few years, it's giving me hundreds of apples. That's called the increase of the earth. That's where wealth comes from. And guess who created that? God created that, not man. Yeah, we have to take care of it. We have to prune it. We have to cultivate it. We have to harvest it. And we have to figure out a way to trade it if we want to trade it. We can just eat it if we want. But that's where wealth comes from. It's not us doing it. Yeah, we work with them, but the increase is God. We take a little seed, a little teeny seed, and we plant it. And it grows up to be a big tree that produces thousands and thousands of apples that have a whole bunch of those little seeds. And we could do it over and over again. But we need the earth to do it. We need water to do it. Right? And we put our labor into it. And so that's where the increase comes from. That's what Idaho is about. What's the number one? What is the number one industry in Idaho?
Taters.
Well, it's agriculture. It might, taters is kind of our symbol, right? But it's certainly agriculture. It's agriculture. It's putting that little seed in the ground and increasing off of it. That's what our number one industry is. And so, and then being able to take that and trade, right? Freely trade that. And what is free trade? It's a willing buyer and a willing seller, right? There's no need for government in between that. In fact, there shouldn't be. In fact, that's what our Constitution puts forth. The government is there to protect the right to trade, not to get in the middle of it, not to profit off of it. It's there to protect the right for one person who's a willing buyer to make an agreement with a willing seller, and they trade whatever it is of value that they want to trade. And so now I ask another question. What state in the Union was one of the first states in 2020 to raid a business and shut it down for not complying to the governor's lockdown orders? Can you guess?
Yeah.
It was Idaho. What? Ketchum, Idaho. Harbor Brewing Company. The governor sent ISP, Idaho State Police, in and raided them because they stuck their nose at the governor's lockdown order. Right? right here in Idaho. The Idaho State Police actually went in there and said, issued an order. You will close down your business. And they ignored it. A couple days later, they raided them. They came in, shut them down, took their computers, closed their doors. In Idaho, Ketchum, Idaho. Right? What state was the first state to arrest a mother for taking her kids to the park? Idaho. And we want to go home and say, Idaho is a great place, and it is a great place. It is a great place. And we are more free here than most states, and most of the rest of the country. But we look at what factually happened in Idaho. And we have to ask ourselves, where are we at? Are we going to stop this? Or are we going to continue to allow it to happen more and more? And we can pinpoint where this happened, kind of how it happened. In all three of these cases, the arresting at church for having church, raiding the business, and arresting a mother at the park, what was the excuse that law enforcement used? What was the excuse? Yeah, well, they said it's the governor's order. Which is, he used that excuse, right? It was the governor's orders. And so we can point it all back to the governor. He issued a stay-at-home order, and then all of these, these law enforcement entities, and he actually says in the order that he's directing the sheriffs and the police agencies and Idaho State Police to enforce this order. That's what he says in the order. And obviously, many of them did. They did it. They did enforce the order. And so in Idaho, and in some cases they did it the first of any other state, right? So we have to ask ourselves again, what do we do about it? What do we do about it? Did you have a comment? Oh no, I thought.
Obviously sue him.
Oh, sue him?
Yeah.
Recall him.
Get rid of him.
Get rid of him? Yeah. And what does the Declaration of Independence say?
Hang him. Deprivation of rights.
That's a good interpretation.
Yeah, that's a pretty good. Well, let's actually go here. So I'm looking for a certain sentence. It says, okay, it goes down through, it says that all men are created equal, that God has given them certain unalienable rights. Among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, government are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So what is the purpose of government?
To serve us.
To secure the rights that God has given us. Right? That's God created us, He gave us rights. Man created government to secure those rights. Okay? Then it says that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, which that's what happened in 2020, right? When any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, what rights are they talking about? The right to worship, the right to trade, the right to travel, all of these rights that were infringed upon in 2020 by the governor. So it says, whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new governments, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them, meaning the people, shall most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Makes complete sense, right? So when government becomes destructive to these ends, which is the security of our rights, it is the duty of the people to correct it, right? And so we have a decision to make. The most infringements that we've ever seen in the history of this country happen in 2020 and are bleeding over into 2021. the greatest infringement upon our unalienable rights that God gave us, among which are life, liberty, and property, in Idaho were infringed upon. The greatest, greatest infringement that we've ever seen happened in 2020. And so we as a people have to make a decision as Idahoans. Are we going to alter it? Are we going to abolish it? Are we going to replace it and put new guards? And what I'm proposing, and the reason why I'm standing here right now in front of you, is that I believe that we have a chance to keep the structure in which we have, that we don't need to abolish it, right? That I believe that enough people in Idaho have enough idea about what liberty is and about the way we should live, that if we could get someone in the office of a governor who would actually stand, who would actually correct things, who would actually strip the powers of the bureaucracies in the executive branch and force it on the legislature where it belongs, or the people where it belongs, right? Force it back on them. Say, look, we're not going to do that. The governor's not supposed to manage the budget. That's the legislature's job. The governor's not supposed to spend. We're not supposed to determine where the state funds go. That's the governor, or that's the legislature's job. And among many other things. And get it straightened out so that we could possibly use the state of Idaho in pretty much the structure it is to secure our liberties.
Reboot.
So what's that?
A reboot.
Yeah, a reboot. And then when the federal government comes down, not when,
Yeah.
right?
Again.
Yeah, right.
They come down again.
Again, or we say as, right? Because as they're doing it, guess what? Now, who's there to say, look, you're not going to do that in Idaho? Who's there? Is it a little family that's there trying to just survive? And the federal government's coming down and, no, it's not. It's not the federal government against a little family trying to survive with, little resources, and the federal government's got, insurmountable amount of resources, the largest government ever known to man, with the largest legal team that's ever been concocted in the history of this world. How is that fair? That wasn't the design. What was the design? To make sure that those individuals were protected in their right to worship, their right to trade, travel, all those things. What did the founders design to stop that?
States.
That's right, to stop the state to come in and go,
States' rights.
no, you're not gonna do that.
Right.
You're not gonna do that. They're gonna live free, and you're not gonna do that. Right? There's no fight that needs to go on unless they bring it. And as many of you know, I grew up in southern Nevada and on a desert ranch in southern Nevada. It's a very arid ranch, and it's about as opposite as this place as you can get. We're lucky to get 3 inches of rain, and in order to produce enough feed for one cow in that desert, it takes 100 acres. They live off the shrub, the little grass that'll grow when there is rain. They'll live off the cactuses. They'll live off the Joshua tree, the pears. Yeah, they have mesquite beans. They'll eat the mesquite beans. Sometimes there's not a lot of sage there. It's actually too dry for sage.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where I grew up, and I loved growing up there. It was amazing. I enjoyed it. I felt, I had a whole bunch of brothers and a whole bunch of sisters, and we felt like we were some of the most free people ever. We enjoyed it tremendously. I mean, we worked hard. Work was like, I didn't know that life was, I didn't know that most people don't work as hard as we work. I didn't know that. I thought it was completely normal that you wake up early, like I'm talking 4:30 in the morning, and you work. And during the summer, we worked until it got dark, and sometimes out into the dark. and it was just normal for us to do that. And that's the way I grew up. I grew up on the back of a horse. We were constantly on horses, and I kind of joke about it because people say, like my daughter, because I didn't raise them on the ranch, right? But they say, I want to go horseback riding. I go, well, where else are you going to ride a horse? You gonna ride it on his neck? You're gonna ride it on its belly or its leg? And she's like, Dad, you know what I mean. But to me, riding a horse was work. Like, and when I get on a horse, I'm not getting on a horse to enjoy it. Yeah, I enjoy it, but I'm not getting on to joy, right? When we got on a horse, and to me, when I get on a horse, it's to work. You go to work, gather cattle. The range, there's some chairs up here, there's a couple chairs up here, some over here on the side. And we would ride horses for, and I'm not exaggerating, we would ride horses for days just to find cattle, because it was such a large area. And we had to have, when we were working our horses hard, we had to have multiple horses so we could alternate them. We'd ride one day, the other day, then one would rest, then we ride the other one. And our dogs, like we talk about, most good cattle dogs are kind of short. But we couldn't have the normal cattle dog because they couldn't keep up with the horses day after day after day. So we always had to have something with some leg in them, with some long legs. And also our cattle, because it's so hot there, there's only one breed of cattle that sweats, and that's a Brahma. Well, Brahma have those long ears and have their hump. So we always said, growing up, it was just a common thing. They have to have a little ear in them, right? They have to have a little ear in them so that they can survive. The problem with that is they usually don't bring quite as much on the market. But it didn't matter. That's what we had to do. They had to have a little ear in them to survive out there. And so that's kind of that is the way I grew up. And in fact, when you couldn't round them up with horses, which it would take days and days and days and days and days to do. And you never do it all. You would do a section, and then, but we were always gathering cattle by, we have these waters. And when my family first came into that valley in 1877, they began to capture the water and build water troughs. And then in my dad's time, he's 75 years old, he's diverted that water, and my grandpa and other ranchers diverted that water through the desert, and now it's over a 30-mile span. And when I was growing up, there was 53 ranchers in that area, and my dad's the only one left.
Wow.
All of them tried to comply to the federal government's mandates and requirements, and finally, about 25 years ago, my dad said, no, I'm not doing it anymore. And he was the only one that survived because he said no.
Wow.
And so back to the water, that's what has created life and the ability to use that desert. And the cattle benefit from it. In fact, they survive off of it. Otherwise, they'd have to walk too far. And the problem with cattle walking too far is just like if humans walk too far. They don't get fat, right? And so, you gotta have fat cattle to sell them. You gotta have meat on them. You gotta have a little fat on them. So, you can't have them walking too far. And they still walk a lot, but they have to have water. And then they'll graze around like a 10-mile area, actually. And they'll come into water. It's cool because there'll be a whole bunch of cows, and they'll be out quite a ways, and they'll all have baby calves. And it's hard on those baby calves to walk that far, right? So you know what they do? They get the other cows, or they get one cow to babysit. One or two. And then they'll go in and get water and come back. Once they've got water, then the other one will go get water and come back. That's what they do. Just like us, right? Got to go to the grocery store once in a while. It's a pain to take kids to the grocery store. If you got somebody by, and they do that. They do it all the time. So you run into a herd of cows, and there's one or two cows, and there's a whole bunch of calves, and you know what they're doing. The mothers have gone to go get water. And so, anyway, it was a very unique way to grow up, and I'm very grateful for that opportunity that I had. And I tell you that because I want you to know who I am. I'm a rancher son from southern Nevada. I grew up in a 1,200 square foot home with 14 kids.
Wow.
My dad didn't even have air conditioning
Wow.
until 2017. We had a swamp cooler. I grew up that way.
Welcome to Idaho.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of nice. And that's why I grew up, and I enjoyed it. But when I was about 15 years old, my dad came to me and said, you know, Ammon, and he was doing it out of love, but he said basically that the ranch isn't big enough for the both of us. And I knew what he was saying that, you know, there's no way that this ranch is going to produce enough of a living for more than a couple families. And one of them's his family. So maybe one of my brothers or sisters is going to be able to make a living off the ranch. And that's exactly the way it is. I have a little sister and her husband that work on the ranch with my father. And it still barely makes them enough living. But my dad loves it. And it's generational. I'm the 5th generation on that ranch. We came into that area in 1877. And no one else wanted it. In fact, the first people that came in that area, they were sent down there by Brigham Young from Salt Lake to kind of colonize it, which is something he did all over, right? And they were down there for a summer, and they went back to Brigham Young and said, it's too dry and too hot, it's uninhabitable. No one could live down there. So we always tease that he went and tried to find the most stubborn, obstinate, hard-headed people, and he finds my family, and he sends them down there. And we've been down there ever since. And they leveled the grounds, diverted the water out of the Virgin River, and built a beautiful, productive valley. And, you know, went up on the foothills, and began to capture the water, and began to run cattle, and they began to produce. And my dad, that's who he is. He's a producer. That's what he loves to do. What's he doing? He'll say, I produce a commodity for the American people. What is that commodity? Red meat. That's what he says he produces. I produce red meat. And I do it on the desert where no one else has been able to do it. And where nothing else would be able to do it. I mean, there's only a few things you can do on that desert. And he produces red meat for the American people so that they can purchase it, and they can feed themselves and feed their families. That's what he does. And that's what his joy is. Besides his family, he produces. He doesn't ask for anybody's help. He doesn't ask the government for their help. He doesn't want it. He doesn't ask when they're in hard times, when there's a dry desert that's not producing any feed. He doesn't ask for help. He doesn't get subsidies. He does it on his own because he's a producer and he's a giver, not a taker. That's who he is, and that's how I grew up. And I was taught that you do not take anything that you did not earn.
Like Harry Reid.
Yeah. Yeah, he's from Nevada too, right?
Yeah.
So,
Why did they try to take the property away from your dad? And was the government never supposed to protect him, part of the harm?
good question. So, ultimately what it was is, and what we see here all over the West, all over the country, is there's an extreme environmental agenda. And that agenda is
21.
rooted, yes, it's Agenda 21, Agenda 30, whatever,
2030.
2030, right?
Sustainable development.
Absolutely, sustainable development, there's different terms. But I'm going to give you, if I can, I'm going to try to help you understand the root of it. Because it's something that has been around for a very, very long time. In fact, we actually see it and read about it in the Bible, if you want to go into the Old Testament. Because it's a religion. It is a religion, and it's completely contrary to the Judeo-Christian belief. And what I mean by that is, what are we taught in the Bible? What do we believe? What does the Spirit tell us of what is true? And that is that God created the earth, and He placed mankind on it, man and woman on it. And He commanded them to multiply and replenish the earth, to cultivate it. And He gave us dominion over the earth. These are all terminologies that are in the scriptures, right? Gave us dominion over the earth. So that we can live, so that we can raise our families, so that we can find joy. The founders called it the pursuit of happiness, right? So that we can use this increase that I talked about. Use this increase. And that everything in the world, on the earth, was created for the benefit and use of man. The animals, the plants, the earth, right?
Resources.
The natural resources, right. And that's what we believe. That's what the Bible teaches us. That's what we know works. That's what we know we have to have, right? But there is another religion, and it's becoming very dominant, especially in the high ranks of government. And we have fallen, in many cases, even us in this room, have fallen for this belief in some ways. And that is, it's different. That the earth was not created. That somehow it existed. They can't explain really why or how. And that man is not, mankind, men and women are not the children of God who created this earth. That we're just another species. And what has happened is we have evolved over, millions of years. We've evolved to be intellectually more advanced than the other species. And so what it is that we now, as men and women, children of God, well, they don't look at it as men and women, as humans, right? That we are dangerous to the other species. And therefore they have to be balanced. The species have to be balanced. They have to balance the species. They have to create a disadvantage for mankind. They have to create a disadvantage so that the species can be balanced. In other words, that the human race is an invasive species. And they truly believe this. And so until you understand this, you don't understand why they want to remove dams. Why would they stop from using the forests? Why would they stop from grazing?
Yeah, it makes no sense.
Why are they putting an endangered species above, someone making a living and surviving, right? Well, if you understand what their belief in religion is, and that is that the plants and the animal, they actually worship or consider to be equal in every way as to the human race. And that it is their moral duty and their obligation to balance the species. And if you don't understand this, then you can't understand why they would go to such measures in order to try to create and drive everybody into the cities, drive them off the land. Why they would place a endangered species, which is their term, right? Why would they place a certain animal or plant above mankind? Who remembers Ruby Ridge? Raise your hand if you remember Ruby Ridge, know what it is. Almost everybody. Do you know what that started over?
The missing tank?
Sawed-off shotgun.
Started over a certain plant that was found in his irrigation ditch. That's exactly right.
What plant?
Oh, I don't remember, it doesn't matter. It's that they were going to protect that plant, or at least they said they were, over the life of a mother that they shot in the head while she was holding his baby. Right? They'll go to that extreme. And unless we understand that, we can't understand the logic. Why would they do this? How did they do this? What is their thought process? And I'm going to read you something because I feel it might be impactful, but I got to find it here, so bear with me. Okay. I'm going to read you some words of leaders that prescribe to this basically religion that I'm talking about. Anybody know of a name by the name of, let's start with, I'm going to go to another page, excuse me. It's right here. But. Okay, let's go with, well, how about Al Gore?
He invented the internet.
He's so smart, he invented the internet all by himself. Right? So he was a former vice president, right? And he said, the fate of mankind as well as religion depends on the emergence of a new faith in the future. Armed with such faith, we might find it possible to sanctify the earth. Mikhail Gorbachev. We know who he is? Former head of the Soviet Union. I envision the principles of the Earth Charter, which is basically their declaration of the earth and the species and the balancing of the species and all of that. I envision the principles of the Earth Charter to be a new form of Ten Commandments. They lay the foundation for a sustainable global earth community. Nature is my God. To me, nature is sacred. Trees are my temples, and the forests are my cathedrals. Christian Anton Mayer. He's a well-known German environmentalist and writer and a leader of the environmental movement. He says, we in the Green Movement aspire to a culture model in which killing a forest will be considered more contemptible and more criminal than the sale of a 6-year-old child to an Asian brothel. Rahandra Thakuri, head of the UN IPCC 2002 to 2005. For me, the protection of planet Earth, the survival of all species, and the sustainability of our ecosystem is more than a mission. It is my religion and my drama, and I could go on and on and on. These are some very powerful individuals.
Psychopaths.
Yeah. But what do they believe? They believe something completely different than you and I believe. We believe that the earth was created by God, that we are children of God, that the earth is here for us, that we need to take care of it, yes. That we shouldn't abuse it and be destructive to it, yes. But that it is here for our benefit, for our use. And that's what Idaho is, right? Let's bring it back to Idaho. That is who we are. That is our belief, and that is our action. That is our customs and our culture. That's what we do. And are we going to allow these people to come down into our state and make it so that cutting down a tree is more contemptible than selling a 6-year-old child to an Asian brothel?
Sounds like the mind of a pedophile.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, in 2014, the federal government came down upon my family, right? It was that environmental, because our federal government, these have been infiltrated completely with these people who believe this environmental agenda, right? They not only believe, I mean, it is their worship. That is what they do. And they understood that, look, if we can get the federal government to control all the land and the resources, then we could infiltrate the federal government, and then we can control all the land and resources, and we could stop humans from being invasive to the other species. We could balance the species. And we step back and go, oh, BLM. You know, my neighbor's a BLM ranger. He's a nice guy. He's a range con. Right? In reality, our founders made it very specific that the federal government can't own and control mass amounts of land inside the state. And they put checks and balance. so that the federal government can do the things they need to, but not control the state and the resources of the state. They put provisions in the Constitution to make sure that didn't happen. Yet Idaho now is controlled, 63% of it's controlled by the federal government. And 72% of our subsurface mineral rights. Which means that some private property actually doesn't have the subsurface mineral rights, but the federal government owns it. So that's the situation that we are in Idaho. And Nevada is 89%. Well, after driving and pretty much decimating the ranching industry in Nevada, well, there was one man that kept saying no and standing. And he was literally the last man standing. And his name was Cliven Bundy, which is my father. And so I'm answering your question, right? So you can see why they wanted to destroy my dad. He was the last one. He was saying no. He was the one that was like, he was the last one that was ranching on his original rights, saying that these are my rights, that I've inherited them or purchased them.
That's property, you know,
It's
water
absolutely
rights,
property. That's
timber
exactly
rights,
right.
grazing rights, oil
That's
rights,
exactly right.
HOA rights. They're all property. They have
And
no
they-
right to take those away from us.
That's exactly, and that's what they were doing. They were trying to turn the ranchers' rights, including my dad's rights, that were established, decades ago. They were trying to turn them into privileges. And saying that they're our rights and we're just giving you privilege to use it. And my dad wouldn't allow that to happen.
How did the federal government get, did you say 63% of the minerals?
We gave it
rights
to them.
un-
63% of the land
They're not
mass.
saying no.
Okay, let me,
They're not saying
so
no.
I'm gonna answer that question. So thank you, but I haven't,
Somebody asked them it.
I'm gonna answer that question right after I finish answering yours. Because that was the reason why, because he said no. Now, they had an excuse. You mentioned Harry Reid. Well, Harry Reid had worked out a deal with the Chinese corporation. This is not a conspiracy. This is 100% factual. He worked it out with the Chinese corporation to build one of the largest solar farms in the world. The largest solar farms in the world. And it was 70 miles from the Bundy Ranch. Then the environmentalists got involved and they said, because they're all mixed, right? They're all controlling this land and they're all, they're all just kind of on a mission together. And they said, well, if you're gonna build this huge solar farm and it creates a tremendous amount of heat and everything, all of that area, where are the desert tortoise and the other species gonna go? And you know what they said? Well, let's find a mitigation area. Who said mitigation area? Man, you're right on. Let's find a mitigation area. That'll be great. Well, you know what? We want to destroy this guy that's saying no, so let's use the Bundy Ranch as the mitigation area. And we'll remove him, and this will be a great excuse to remove him, and then we'll put all the desert tortoise and all the other species that can't live under the solar farm on the problem is what? My family's been there for 140 years. And my dad was stubborn. He was like, I will do whatever it takes. He kept saying that. I will do whatever it takes to preserve my liberty, my livelihood, and my property. I will do whatever it takes. And he was determined. Whatever it takes, he said. And still to this day, the Bundy cattle have never left that land.
Awesome.
There was many destruction that went on. They sent 213 men, armed federal agents from 5 agencies, snipers on the hills. They began to kill the cattle from the helicopter, destroy the water infrastructure. They began to, tase us, beat us to the ground, sick dogs on us. They began to do all these things. And the American people finally said, look, because we were filming it, going, look, there's snipers on the hills. They're pointing guns at our children. They're killing our cattle from the helicopters. They're digging mass graves and burying them in them.
Yeah.
They're destroying our water infrastructure with backhoes and dump trucks. And we're filming it. And guess what happened? The American people said, we're not going to stand by and let this happen. And thousands of people come flooding to the ranch. And it turned it right side up. All of a sudden now, there was accountability for the first time.
Yeah.
And who knows how long, there was accountability. Now the American people were surrounding my family and saying, you will not do this anymore. You will stop. And you know what they did? They stopped. And then the American people said, and you will leave this area immediately. And these federal agents, and they gave them an hour. These federal agents got in 107 vehicles, multiple agents in each vehicle, and they left within an hour. And they never came back.
Because they
So
don't have jurisdiction. Under Title 42, Section, United States Criminal Code, Title 18, Section 242, deprivation of rights. They have, someone needs to, you need to enforce that. Who enforces it? The sheriff? The sheriff's bought up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're right. But ultimately what happened to, our rights are very well documented, right? They're very well documented. They're very well protected in written law. But if no one's there to enforce them, they mean nothing.
Yeah.
They mean nothing. And that day, the people came and enforced it. And they protected my family. And so that experience changed me, completely changed me. I now understood how rights were maintained. I knew they weren't I knew after that point that they were not maintained in the ballot box. They weren't maintained in the courts. That they were maintained upon the grounds that they were established. They were maintained by an individual saying, these are mine, and I will use them and continue to use them. And then if you come to try to take them, I'll defend them, and I'll call on my neighbors and my friends and the other people in this country to defend them with me. I understood that, and then when I look in history, I go, yeah, never have rights been defended in the ballot box. They haven't been defended in the courts. In fact, usually they're taken there.
Yeah.
That's not where they're defended. I go, anytime rights have been preserved or rights have been reclaimed, they've been done by claiming, using, and defending them.
If the, Idaho has 63% owned by government, is that number going up or down, and how come?
Okay, so that was your question. How is that? So let's go back to that. Very, let's get into Idaho, right? Let's talk about Idaho. So 63% of the land mass in Idaho is federally controlled. You notice I don't say federally owned? We have to stop saying, oh, this is BLM land, this is Forest Service land. It is not.
It's our land.
It never has been, and it is not. What have they done? Well, let me back up, because I'm going to explain that. Let's look at a map, right? Let's say we're looking at a map, and we see these spots of green areas that are private property. We know they're private property because there are cities or towns, there are properties, right? You might even have a property out in the middle of nowhere, and there's this little area, and you know that that's your property. It might be, 20 acres, it might be 120 acres, it might be 640, a whole section, right? And then all around it is this federally controlled land, right? And you're like, well, let's step back. How did that happen? That was your question. How did that happen? How did all of a sudden this area, and where do those lines come from? And so what happened? Why is this private and this over here is federally controlled? What happened?
Somebody had a homestead and the government just took everything
Exactly.
all the way around it.
Okay, exactly. What happened is all this land, all of it, from the Mississippi River all the way out, was available to come claim. But out here in the arid area, right, you couldn't make a living unless you had water, and you had to divert the water. So typically around the waters that you can level the ground and divert the waters, they became private property. Why? Because people just claimed it. They came out and claimed it, and there was a process. If it was prior statehood, then they had to claim it and go through the processes of the Homesteading Act or Desert Entry Act or whatever act it was. Go out and claim it. They had to improve it for 5 years, and then they could claim title on it, right? If it was after statehood, then there was some other things within the jurisdiction of the state. And so, but that's all that happened. And what happened to this land, this other 63%? What happened then? Why is it 63% federally controlled right now? Cause nobody claimed it. And then, contrary to what we've been led to believe, it wasn't until the sixties and the seventies and the eighties, and I'm talking 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, the federal government comes in and goes, look at all this unappropriated, unclaimed land. And they sent their engineers, they began to map it, they put their signs on it, you know, and all of us now generationally were like, well, that's BLM land.
Yeah.
But what happens if you go, let's say there's a section out in the middle, and this is another interesting thing. You look at a county, it's all sectioned off. Well, what does the business does a county have sectioning off all the land in the county if 63% of it belongs to the federal government? It's because it doesn't. Now go and let's say there's a section, right, of federally controlled land in Kootenai County, right? And you go down to the county recorder and you ask them, would you show me the title on that?
Ooh.
Yeah.
What is the county recorder gonna say?
Uh,
She's gonna say, oh, that's BLM land, or that's Forest Service land. No, I wanna see the title.
How'd they get
She
it?
can't produce the title. There is no title. It's unappropriated land,
It's unappropriated land.
right? They claimed it. They used it. They defended it. They used the natural law against the people.
Yeah.
Put a fence around it.
That's right. They stopped people from using that. That's how, you know, and then they said, well, rancher, even though you have rights on this well, we've claimed the real estate, so now you have to pay us. It's a privilege now. It's not a right. Okay? And they completely have literally taken 63% of the land mass in Idaho by simply applying natural law of claim, use, and defend when they have no jurisdiction or right, constitutional jurisdiction or right to do it.
But you said mineral rights.
Yeah.
I said land and then I said mineral.
I just took a real estate course and I learned that 100% of the water, springs, rivers, creeks, even little springs, are all owned by the state of
They're
Idaho.
all jurisdiction of the state.
You don't get any of it
Okay?
unless they say so.
So,
So hyperventilate, cause air's free.
well, let's talk, so let's not get into the state water jurisdiction. I would love to, and I actually built our entire case on that in Nevada, so I'm pretty versed on it.
Yeah.
Let me flesh out this just
Sure.
a little longer, because that gets really complicated.
Yeah.
So you said, well, you said,
Mineral.
I said, there's 63% of the land mass in Idaho is federally controlled and 72% of the subsurface mineral rights. Okay? That means there's whatever the math is, 9% of private property in Idaho that they don't even own their mineral rights. And it's even worse in Nevada. You wanna know, so where that comes from is at one time, that might have been federally controlled property, and then the federal government sold it to a private owner, but then they retained the mineral rights. Now imagine, they're selling property in Idaho that they don't own. They don't have title to. And what are they doing when they do that? They're just manipulating the county to appropriate and make a title to it. They make the money, and now the new title goes to the owner.
Yeah.
But the owner
Right?
doesn't own it.
Well, the owner owns it in the sense that no one else claimed it, and it's a first appropriation. But the federal government shouldn't be making the money on that, right? So anyway, and we could talk about disposal and appropriation, but that's what's happening. I'll give you an example of that. Las Vegas, Nevada, Harry Reid. That's where he made all his money. How did he make all his money? Getting the federal government to sell the land to his development company, and then for very little money, and then him getting title, and then them developing it and selling it for high-end real estate. But the thing is the Bureau of Land Management, the federal government, retained the mineral rights. So then people are buying these homes, and they decide, well, we want to build a swimming pool. Well, mineral rights are like 18 inches or 2 feet, as soon as you go 2 feet below that. Well, so they were digging these big pools 10 feet deep, And the Bureau of Land Management was coming in and fining them
Wow.
for not getting a permit because they own the mineral rights.
Wow.
See how messed up it is? It was never supposed to be that way. It was supposed to be as soon as the state become a state, that was the act of disposal. No longer did Congress have interest in it. U.S. Congress. They lost jurisdiction. They lost criminal jurisdiction. They lost jurisdiction over the land, the resources. Article 4, Section 4, Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2 lays that out, that the Congress shall dispose of it. Right? Once it's disposed of, then it becomes into the jurisdiction of the state, and the state can then dispose of it to the people.
Dispose as in sell?
Doesn't have to be to sell. No, most of the land, most of the land was not sold. It was claimed. Why? Federal government, in its originality, was supposed to, the growth pattern of the United States was they would go, first of all, they, claim through war or purchase. Remember the Louisiana Purchase?
Right.
Well, all, south of here, not necessarily Idaho, but that was acquired through the Mexican, American War, right? Texas joined the Union, because they won a war against Mexico and they became independent. They joined the Union. And so the growth pattern was, let's say the Louisiana Purchase. The United States government purchased the Louisiana Purchase, and then they would encourage the people to go out on it and to begin to claim it. And once it became an area where there was enough people that they could create a territorial government, then the Congress, it was the duty of the Congress to decide what the territorial borders would be, who would be the territorial governor and the territorial and all of this, but it was all done under U.S. Congress. And then, as soon as it became populated enough, then that territory can basically say, we want to be a free and independent state, part of the Union, equal to all the other states. We want to be free, no longer under the control and rule of Congress, but that we can rule and control and govern ourselves as a free, independent state. And so they would petition Congress, and Congress usually had these requirements of, you need to have at least 40,000 people in the territory. You have to give us the territorial boundaries. You have to show that you can be independent as far as, your economy and so forth. And if they felt like the state could then, or that territory could then become a free, independent state, then they would pass an act through Congress to enable it into the Union. And then, as soon as that happened, Congress no longer had jurisdiction over the land, the resources, over who is governor, how the counties are broken up, all the government, the local governments. They lose all of that. They lose all of that by design, so the people can be free. But in the West, that happened, and then later they came back and go, look at all this land. And they came in and began to claim it. And now they're in every piece of our lands and resources, to the point where we can't even build our houses to get logs without permission. We can't ranch or farm. They're controlling our water. And why have they done that? Because these environmentalists have infiltrated into the federal land agencies.
Does
Federal
that
government.
mean
That's a
the
federal-
Idaho residents will never be able to take any of that 63%?
No, so what am I proposing? This is the good part, right? I've laid the foundation of the problems and made it look grim, right? But who has power to dispose of? Or to appropriate? That's the right term. Who has the power to appropriate? The county and the states.
Right.
Why don't we use that mechanism and appropriate these lands?
Well, that'll make it
And
happen.
appropriate them for
Well, for private property.
property, okay.
We can take some of our, multiple use lands, hunting, fishing, hiking, all of those lands, and we can designate that for those rights.
Right.
They're multiple use, but you gotta say on those lands, ranchers could have grazing rights, loggers, miners, And it doesn't stop the hunting, the fishing, and the hiking. They can all do that, just as they've always done, right? So you designate those lands for those purposes, and then you allow the other lands to be claimed, appropriated, adjudicated into the people's hands through whatever mechanism of disposal the state or the county decides. We're talking, just so you know, we're talking about 32 million acres in Idaho. 32 million acres. It's actually 32 plus million acres. Okay?
Wow.
Now, what happens if we don't? So hopefully that answers your question. What
Sierra
happens if we
Club
don't?
comes in and you can't go there, they get to camp around the edges.
So, who did you say would come in?
Sierra Club.
Well, that's happened definitely.
They'll camp around the edges and you
Well-
won't be able to walk on it.
Well, and we have these very wealthy billionaires coming in right now, buying up the mass lands of
Some from
private land.
China, yeah.
What's gonna happen? If 63% of our land is federally controlled, in a federal monopoly controlled by Washington DC, and then you have these huge billionaires coming in buying these huge amounts of land,
And homes.
what happens to the little people? What happens to us?
Shut up.
We can't use the land for that increase. We have to get permission. We can't do anything. We can't build our homes. We can't do anything. We can't spread out. We can't do the things that we have to do. We can't use the earth in a way in which God created it for us.
How much of the land is owned by people that are not, creating increase from it?
Well, it's quite a bit. And why are they buying up that land? I think you're hitting it. Why are they buying up that land? So that humans can't use it. Right? Have you ever heard of these the nature conservative
Yeah.
conservative areas,
Conservatoriums.
CRSs, and all of these things? It's all, you go look at they actually put them in the on the title, that it is a no-use land.
Right.
No use. You cannot use it for human use, period, that's it. They fence it off, and it is part of this extreme environmentalist agenda. It is the extreme environmentalist agenda, to try to capture as much land and resources as you can, get it in their control, so mankind cannot use it. It is a balancing of the species.
They're even doing it
Okay.
on farmland. Bill Gates is buying tons.
That's exactly that. You're
I think
exactly
he's the
right.
world's largest
Can't farm it.
landholder now of
Yeah.
farmland, and he's not using it.
That's exactly right.
So wouldn't it be fair to say that we no longer have a government that is ruled by the consent of the people? And how does the people give their consent and,
Well, it used to be consent was given through a vote.
through a vote, but
Through a vote.
a percentage of what, 51%? Is that what it was?
Well, I mean, so, cause I was about ready to propose the solution. And part of that solution, of course, is the appropriating of lands.
Yeah.
Right, getting these lands into the people's hands. Our founders were very clear about, look, that it was very dangerous for whether it was power, land, to be in one body.
Right.
Money, to be in one body. That's why in the Constitution, they give the government power to break up monopolies. Okay? So we end up in a situation where it's kind of dire. But I wanna emphasize this as well, cause what happens if we don't get control of our land and resources? And what is happening? First of all, remember when we look at a map, we look at the private property? Well, they're becoming more and more densely populated.
Right.
And what's the number one industry in Idaho? Agriculture. Okay, agriculture. And our agricultural land, the best agricultural land in Idaho is now being built upon with housing, right?
Because they can't build elsewhere.
Exactly, they can't build elsewhere. they're forced to build on our agriculture, our very valuable agricultural land, and we're destroying our number one industry in Idaho.
And it's
We're destroying it fast.
Supposedly the topsoil's being sent to China,
I don't know about that.
no?
No, I don't, I think that's a big conspiracy, but,
Oh.
but it doesn't matter, because when you put pipes and gravel
Yeah,
and
and housing.
buildings and concrete, you can't use it for agricultural land, right? And there's only, I mean, the reason why they claim that, because it was the land that you could cultivate and irrigate, right? That's what it was. But why couldn't we build up on the foothills and up in the forests and allow that and kind of protect that agriculture land, so we protect our number one industry in Idaho? Okay, so that's problem number one. Problem number two is that we have, and this goes right along with it, we have an affordable housing crisis. Well, why? Because we're all fighting over I gotta do my math in my head, we're all fighting over the 37%, right? That's what's happening. We're fighting over it, and, and then what we do build on is agriculture, and now, literally, our young, people can't even practically, even in their heads, ever own a home. Imagine being in a generation where you're coming out of high school or college, and literally the idea of never owning a home is something that you have to consider.
Yeah.
In Idaho. Can you imagine that? That rental might be the best they ever get.
California.
Why would we do that when we got 63% of our land is controlled by Washington D.C. and they're keeping us from building on it? Why do we put up with it?
What are we to see?
Okay? Man, you're taking me off
the
of
wrong
this.
building.
Okay, because there's one more major problem because of this. And that is, in the bigger cities especially, they're becoming so densely populated, right? And when we become densely populated, you start growing up rather than building out. You start building up rather than building out. Putting people in high-rise apartments, the congestion of the traffic and the smog and everything, and you take them off of the land. They no longer are growing things. They think that they get their meat from the grocery store. That milk, the milk is, Albertson makes it in the back somehow. And they lose a complete connection, and they lose their conservative identity. They lose their ability to think straight about where the land, about this increase of the earth that we talked about. They don't understand it. So they start voting that way. And then all of a sudden, because they're so densely populated, then all of a sudden you end up with what I call the Hunger Games syndrome. Where you got a capital city and they're all dressing gay and getting all fancy and having their little games at the expense of other people. And the districts are just funneling food and resources into them so that they can live the way they want to live, and everybody else is pretty much just a slave to them, and they politically control everybody else. We're right on the verge of that here in Idaho. We're right there. But I did the math. I did some math, and I want to inspire you a little bit. So I looked at, because we have this really cool thing that we're building for the campaign, and we can look at demographics and all kinds of things. We can identify whether your neighbor's a Democrat or not. Right?
They have purple hair.
But, we got a Democrat in the room.
All the time.
Okay, good.
The hair gives it away.
Anyway, so I want to inspire you, right? Because who knows how many people put Governor Little in the office of governor? Brad Little in the office of governor. How many people it took? So where's, in Idaho, where is it determined of who's going to be the governor of Idaho?
Boise.
Boise.
Now, I'm not looking for a city,
Oh.
okay?
County?
What election?
The primary.
The fake one.
It's the, the stolen one, right? So she said it, the primary. Right? Right, because the primary, and we think, oh, we forget that the primary's in May, and they want us to forget that it's in May.
Yeah.
And we go to November, we're gonna vote, well, guess what? It's too late. You're about 6 months too late.
Right.
It was already decided in Idaho. It was done in the primaries in May. Because we're a Republican state. The Democrats or no other party has any real influence in the state. Yet. Right? And so, everybody right here, just, you gotta go vote in the primary. But so now, in the 2018 primaries, how many people did it take to make Brad Little the governor? Anybody know?
10,000?
No, you did the math.
Wild guess.
Tell us.
Can't be
Four.
done.
See, like I'm abusing my power right now, right? I know something you know, and I'm abusing it.
27% of the vote in the primary.
73,000 people.
Wow.
1.8 million people live in Idaho, 73,000 people decide. There's one of my daughter and my son right there. So. That's Brinkley and Elias. They've been traveling with me. So 73,000 people. Isn't that crazy?
That is-
So now, if you think about it, let's look. So if we take Kootenai County, Bonner and Bounder, right? Is it Bounder?
Boundary.
Boundary, yes. Gotta get it down. Wendy knows it pretty good. She's been studying. So if we take those and we put them in our little machine, which we did today, and we cut out the Democrats, okay? How many people do you think is left? 124,000 people. Okay, so these three counties up here could completely control who's going to be the next governor of Idaho.
Voters,
Right?
that's just voters.
Yeah, that's just voters, that's registered voters. Okay,
Wow.
that's Republican voters, then there's a very small amount of independent and constitutional, and then there's what's called unaffiliated voters, right? So with those three, four groups, if you will, which are conservative, right? They're the conservative groups. You have 124,000 registered voters. That's not the people you go out and get to be registered. Those are already registered voters. You see the power you have? You can completely control who's the governor of Idaho.
That's just the panhandle.
That's just those three counties. Just the three counties.
Kootenai, Bonner,
And Boundary.
And Boundary, not Shoshone.
Nope, just those three.
Okay.
All I did is search those three.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow.
So we can't sit here and say, oh, Bush is gonna control us, and then go, well, it's just useless to participate and all of that. If this is what we believe we can do in order to get our state back in order, then let's get busy and do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Do you know or not, whether or not, the state's elections for governor are controlled by Dominion voting machines?
I do know, they're not.
Good.
And just so you know, I talked to the Secretary of State, and he says, hey, all the elections are just okay. Here in Idaho. They're
Just okay.
Why would you trust him?
Yeah.
But, okay, so that is a concern for people, right? That if you vote, what does it matter? Because
That's all we got.
it's gonna take, right?
All
But it
liberals are
is.
down
I
at
mean,
those voter
it's
registration
basically the difference
ballots.
between just going to war, right? And trying to make it right, okay? Now, so in Idaho, and we're doing a bunch of research, and we have all the information except one county, right, Wendy? So we've done all the research in every county of Idaho except one, and we will get the one, we just can't get to the right person and get the right answers. We'll get there. And what happens in Idaho is there are some that just use paper and they count paper and that's it. But the majority of them use a paper ballot and then they put it in a certain machine that counts it. And it's supposed to be disconnected from the internet. It's supposed to be, right? And then it goes on a jump drive, actually a USB jump drive. And then that's transferred to the county, I don't know, is it the recorder, Wendy? County recorder? Is it the recorder?
County clerk.
The clerk, county clerk. And the county clerk ends up putting in her computer or whatever, and then she reports it to the Secretary of State of Idaho on a statewide election, right? So you can see problems there. You see quite a bit of problems every time there's a transfer, every time there's something electronic. Who certifies the machine, who certifies the USB drive, and in fact in Ada County, which is the largest voting base, they transfer it twice with USB, like from a USB to a USB, and we don't understand why they need to do that, right? But they do, and so what we're going to do, and what we are doing, we are going to be getting our volunteer army, which is growing. It's been amazing. We want people to come and join our army, and we will be placing people at the polling booths. In fact, we're getting people to volunteer with the county to actually be there officially, not with the Bundy campaign, officially there, but they're there. We know they're there and they're good. And then we'll have also people watching, right? And then we are going to build, and we are building a campaign software, and we will have a reporting system. So it'll be lifetime reporting, where if there's something going on, you can video it, you can camera, and you'll immediately send it. And on staff, we will have attorneys on staff, we'll have computer forensic analysts on staff, and we already have those people in place. We've already have them committed. And we will be able to directly bring that evidence at the time to the Secretary of State and say, look, you have to stop this right now. You have to address this, you have to investigate this, and do that right now. Because you can't do it 2 days later, 2 weeks later, 2 months later. It doesn't work. They've already just declared the winner, and it is what it is,
Swept
right?
it under the rug.
Which is baloney.
Yeah,
Baloney.
it is. I agree. We should have time to work it out. I remember when I was young, there was an election that was so close, and it took them like 2 months to determine who was going to be whatever. I don't even remember what position it was, what office it was. So we have to bring those up now. We have to address them at that time. We will also have that same army that if we need to count ballots, we can count ballots. We'll have the forensic analysts that they can, if we can get access to, there's questions, we're gonna have these things in place. And
Hopefully people that work inside the voter register, because there's a lot going on in there,
and that's why we need eyes everywhere.
in certain ones.
And that's why we need eyes everywhere.
So I have read, I believe, that you have stated in the past that getting back to the primary, and we all know how important that is. I've read your statement, it was a while ago, wasn't it, where you stated that if there was a clear leader, that you would back out of it, correct?
No,
Okay,
But-
so let's
so,
address
but,
that
but
issue.
you're,
What
okay,
you would do, because I did go to a Janice McGeehan, I did go to one of her meetings, I asked her that question if she was committed to that, and I did not get a straight answer, so I wanna know what your answer is to that, and how, because we're just gonna shoot ourselves in the foot
that's
if
definitely the
we don't
narrative,
address that
right?
issue, and if you guys are not all on the same page, and I wanna know if you
Oh,
have
no, don't put it on us.
I know.
If you're not in the same page,
But there's,
right?
we
You're the
all
one
are
gonna
in
split
here.
it, not me.
well,
The
we're
people
gonna
are the
be-
one gonna split it. I'm giving you a choice.
Why would we back out? If he's-
What's that?
No, I'm just backing you up. Why
Yeah.
would you leave this when they're wrong?
Yeah, I am giving you a complete different choice, right? If you wanna split the vote, then split the vote. If you don't wanna go out and talk to your neighbor and convince them that I'm the one that's going to actually make a difference, and you believe that, then don't blame it on me.
Yeah.
I'm giving you another choice,
You're the good guy.
And
A
she
choice
thinks she
different.
is too.
but
know?
you get to make that choice,
Well, I get to
not,
make
not
that
her or I.
decision
Her
for me.
room.
Not
I
her
only
or,
have
or
one
I.
vote.
So also, so let me understand the, and I get it, I'm not, I'm
Yeah,
just.
because there are
but
a lot of people
let's
that are
understand the
just
logic.
resistant.
You know, Janice McGeehan, you know, I don't think you're gonna do a damn thing for our state. You haven't done in 12 years anything for our state. You didn't stand for us when, in 2020, when we were begging you to stand for us. You didn't inspire and unite the legislature. You don't have any control over the Senate, which you're the president of. And yet, somehow, I'm gonna back out so that people can all vote for you, and then look at what happens to my children because I backed out.
Yeah.
Bam.
And it's the people's choice. It's the people's choice, and I plan on running a race, and I am running a race. We're doing this every single night, convincing people, roomfuls of people, that of the reality that we have of being actually free, of Idaho being a state of refuge for people who want to worship, want to trade, want to travel, want to do these things, right? But I hate to say it, Janice McGeehan is not going to give you that.
But you
She's
even
not.
have now Democrats, or Republicans, asking Democrats to get involved. That was just in the news, a week ago? They're asking Democrats to get involved in the primary race
So,
to break all
I
of this
just showed you
up.
how there's 124,000 people
Yeah.
in 3 counties.
So,
If you would wake up and get it done. But
I think, so in the, you know, in this, scenario, what she's trying to say is if the, where you pretty much know that you're not gonna win. But if you don't back out and you split the vote, that means the greater of, you know, like someone like Little gets back in, or, you know, someone, you know, like,
And the Democrats
that's what
Okay.
people are worried
so
about.
let's think about this logic, okay? Let's think about, because we got a bunch of pragmatists.
And hopefully that won't happen.
We have to get through our pragmatic thoughts, right? So, let's think about this. So, if I have the power to split the vote, and if it's that significant, then do I have the power to win?
Yeah.
And who determines that? How are you gonna know that? Are you gonna rely on polls? How are you gonna know who's winning?
Yeah, that's my question is, like, how
Okay,
are you gonna know who's ahead? I mean,
Yeah, because the papers.
well, you're the one proposing that someone steps out because they're behind.
well, this is
So
what
how
I-
are you,
this
how are
is
you
what-
proposing?
This is what, I mean, on all of the neighborhood pages, we get into this discussion all this time. It's the most, I think, concerning thing going into this primary race on a local level. They talk about this back and forth.
Do they
And
talk,
so,
do they talk about the numbers? So Janice, when she did win, right, it was a 5-way race when she ran. When you look at who voted for her and who her base is, she has no practical chance of winning a governor's race. None, especially if she's head-on-head with Governor Little. You know what it's gonna take? It's gonna take someone who will inspire people to come out of the woodwork,
yeah.
to inspire people to vote and to register to vote that haven't registered. It's gonna take someone who has a past and a history of actually doing something. And I'm sorry, Janice McGeehan is not going to do that.
Yeah.
And in order for either her or I to win, it's going to take people coming out of the woodwork and being inspired. It's gonna take the 3 counties up here in the Panhandle saying, look, we have a chance to make a difference here. Let's do it. It's gonna take that, right? That's what it's gonna take. And so, you know, I could get into the practicality, but like, how would I know? I mean, I could show you some polls. Would you like me to read you some
No,
polls?
we voted in the one you did. You were quite well ahead on the conservative one.
So,
was
do we
what
go
to
with that
include.
one?
I don't know.
No, Janice, I'm gonna call her.
Good
Janice, you have to
question.
back
That's a great
out.
question.
You have to back out, Janice.
I mean, when it all started, you know,
I-
my husband
because-
was very much for you, and I was still on the fence, so I went to her meeting. But I do feel that you are the person for the time that we are living in.
Absolutely.
You are the right person for this job. I don't think she is, and I wasn't that impressed with a lot of her articulation
And
of
it-
concepts.
There might have been a,
But-
like,
A couple years ago, she would have been 1,000 times better than
that's what I'm
we
saying.
had.
5 years ago, or
Yeah.
even a couple years ago, she might have been the person for the job.
But now.
In maybe 10 years, hopefully, she might be the person for the job,
Mhm,
but not right now.
right.
No.
She
And
is
that's why I
not
have
the
my
right
hat
person
on.
for the job right
That's
now.
why I've got my sticker.
And we have to get everybody to understand that. And every poll that has gone on has me leading her, in some by double. Okay? So if we're gonna go off a poll, if we're gonna use that, then, okay, then we gotta put the pressure on Janice. Right? But it's the people gonna split the vote, not me. I mean, you have to understand that I'm giving you a choice. You could completely reject me and not waste your vote. Right? Not waste, yeah, Bob.
You go, I'm gonna kind of change it just a little bit, but it's still on this subject, but way back, you talked about what your dad said when you were 15, how you had to peel out because you couldn't afford, the ranch wasn't big enough for all your siblings and work. So, can you elaborate a little bit about when you peeled out, what you did? Because I think it'll go ahead and then bring everybody up to speed about what you and Wendy were doing today, and about, you said your team, what you got going on, and that 124,000. Just kind of go through that so everybody knows your background on that, and that could change a little perspective.
Yeah, I kind of, I didn't finish the rest of that story, did I? So, I ended up realizing that I wasn't going to be able to be a rancher. And that was hard, and I wanted to do that, but under those circumstances and with the price of, land and all of that, there just wasn't a practical way for me to think that I was going to be able to do what I had done growing up. And so, when I got old enough to leave the house, I ended up leaving, and I served a mission in Minnesota for 2 years, teaching the gospel there of Jesus Christ, followed my grandfather's example. And then I came home, and I went to a little bit of school at Southern Utah University. And I at that time, I started a business, as a little fleet maintenance business, where I managed to maintain commercial trucks and changed oil and did that type of stuff. But Cedar City was pretty small, but I was stuck there because I was waiting for somebody. And finally, she came along, and I married my wife Lisa in 2001. And then right after, just a few months after that, we decided to move to Arizona because there was a lot more business opportunity down there. And I ended up building a fleet maintenance company up down there, and it became one of the largest private fleet maintenance companies in Arizona. I dealt with millions of dollars a year in budgets. I hired hundreds of people. We developed a system and systems that became basically the industry standard. And it was a very successful thing that I was able to do. It's a ton of moving parts and a lot of things going on. And I was able to do that to build up a very profitable business. Now, when I was about 17 years into business, I, for the entire time, had been looking for software to manage my business. Because I was using a financial software, then I was using another software that we could issue work orders with, but then they were all written, and we were, had all this paperwork passing around, and I mean, it was crazy. And I had a full office staff, I had, almost 10 people just to process the paperwork and everything that was going on in our office. And then I had another system that just tracked the maintenance, just so that it would warn me when this unit on this service needed to be done. And there was other pieces, just employee information and benefits and all of that. And I looked and searched for a software that would help me put it all together, and there just wasn't out there. And so, we live in the United States of America, right? Land of opportunity. And I said, well, if I can't find it, I'm gonna make it. And so I had the resources, and I had the processes, and I hired a programmer and a project manager, and we put a team together, and we began to build this software. And for 3.5 years, we developed it. And we fine-tuned it in the shop. I used my customers as guinea pigs, and they were fine with it because I had good relationships with them. Said, hey, we're gonna try this out, give me your feedback, and we would change it, make it better. Use my vendors, part suppliers, my technicians, my office staff, and everything, and we were able to put an amazing software, very complicated, tons of moving parts that communicated, and it was all paperless. And it became such an amazing tool. We're like, well, let's sell this to other shops. So we began selling to other shops. And now it's one of the leading fleet maintenance shop management softwares in North America. And since that time, I've sold both my shop and my software. And in fact, I was able to move to Idaho using the software and manage my shop from Idaho. And I did that for several years, and didn't even hardly have to go down there very much because the software worked so well, and I could see and understand. And again, I just emphasize that, this business experience that I had at my fleet maintenance shop business, I had for 21 years. And I've been able to, on a high level, develop and unify people in the same direction with the same vision, and been able to get them all moving and working together and unifying together to actually produce something that's good for other people, that's beneficial for other people. And I believe that those skills I will be able to use in the office of a governor. And I just want you to know that, I have managed, I have been a CEO before. I have managed, many people, hired and fired and brought people together and organized people and worked with people in that way. And as you may know, I've also done it in the defense of individual rights. I built a software communication tool called People's Rights that now has, actually, I've been telling people it has almost 60,000, but it actually has almost 62,000 now people in it. And it's a communication tool that has been very beneficial and pushed back against a lot of the stuff that was happening in 2020 and so on. And I have, in cases such as like the Hammond family in Oregon, I was able to unite tens of thousands of people in a very short period of time to look and understand and go in one direction. And ultimately, what did that result? Ultimately, people don't know all this, but ultimately, President Trump pardoned 17 people. That's all he pardoned. And 3 of those people I advocated for. And so everybody has gifts from God. They're all different. And I have, and I have weaknesses, and our weaknesses are all different. But one of my strengths is to be able to unite people under one vision and to get them to go one direction. That is a strength of mine that I've been able to do. And I think that will become very, very beneficial to the people of Idaho if I had the opportunity, or if they chose for me to be the governor. So I think that was, Bob, do you have a question?
Yeah, this might be a good segue. You mentioned a couple of times what Brad Little shouldn't be doing, what the governor should not be doing, what the lieutenant governor has not been doing. What do you see as the role of the governor? What would be your job? What should you be doing?
Well, what is the role of the state? What's the role of the state?
Protecting the rights of people.
Right? The Declaration said to secure the rights of the people, right? That is the role of the state. That's why we organize it, so we can be a powerful enough entity, united together enough, that when these rights are infringed upon by whoever it might be, the state can have the resources to be able to defend those rights, to secure those rights. So now we get back to, this little family and the federal government coming down, right? What is the role of the governor? Is to manage and to use the state's resources for the defense of the people's rights, to stand and say no. And it's like, I use this example because in a situation with my family, the federal government came down upon them. And you know what the state and the county said?
Nothing.
We're gonna take a neutral position.
Yeah.
That's not neutral.
We'll let you
It's not
find out.
neutral, it's not neutral at all, and I compare, and I hesitate to compare, but it's such a good analogy. You've got a child, and then you got a pedophile.
Yeah.
Neutral
Right?
position,
Who's supposed to stop? It'd be the parents, right? Or whoever else. But what happens if the parents just say, well, I'm gonna take a neutral position?
Not neutral.
Taxation without
It's not
representation.
neutral, right? It's not neutral when you leave the weak and the innocent, to the powerful and the wicked. That's not, and it's the design. So to answer your question plain and clear, yeah, there's many things that the governor has to do, administrative things. He has to be a CEO, but his entire purpose is to lead the agencies and the government into defense and the security of the people's rights. And we're back to maybe 5 years ago or a couple years ago, there might have been somebody else that played politics for his entire life, that he would be just fine in that position, or her. Maybe in 10 years that'll be okay. But right now, I don't think I need to emphasize to you enough, or I can't emphasize to you enough. I don't need to tell you that we need someone who is going to actually use the state's resources for the purpose in which it was established for. And that is to secure the rights of the people.
So are you pissed off enough not to bend like all the others have?
All I'm gonna
What's the
say about
difference
that,
between you and the others that have talked like this, and why would we believe that you're not gonna become part of that machine like so many small politicians start out pure and just and wanting the right things, and they seem won over to greed? Is that a fair question?
yeah, that's an absolutely fair question. And I'm gonna answer it very clearly. I'm gonna answer it with the scripture. By their fruits you shall know them.
Yeah.
What have been my fruits?
Track record.
What's my track record?
Excellent.
What have I done in the past? Have I compromised?
Never.
I sat in prison for 2 years, and a year of that I was in solitary confinement.
Wow.
I never once got to see or touch my family, not one time in that 2 years.
Wow.
And I did not compromise one bit.
That sounds like a yes.
It is. But it has to be you believing it, not me just saying it.
That's right.
And so by my fruits you know me. What have I done in the past?
Stood for freedom, baby.
Yeah. And in every incident, you go look, in every incident, I have done it peacefully. Now I do believe that force is warranted in defense only, right? But if we can do it peacefully, we must do and try. And contrary to what the media wants to say or others want to say, my family and I have been the peaceful ones. And we have put up with way more than we should have. We had every right to use violence in those situations, but we chose not to. And through the hand of the Lord, we were restored back into our place. And now I'm standing in front of you literally as a miracle. It is a miracle. They spent $100 million trying to prosecute my family. I went through 2 major federal trials. And the little ranching family beat the federal government in their own courts. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And so, there's my answer, I guess. Yes.
So your slogan is keep Idaho, Idaho. I come from a family, 6th generation Idahoan. Awesome. We've been in this state for over 300 years. So can you explain to me Because like, I know that you're somewhat new to the state,
I've been here for 7 years,
well,
which is compared to you pretty new.
so what do you think Idaho is?
Well, I explained, you were late. So
Sorry, I was at work.
I late now, I'm glad you work.
I haven't taken one day off this entire year.
Maybe you need to tell us. I mean, I could tell you, and I did lay out what I believe Idaho is, you know. But, you know, maybe you're the example, maybe going to work and producing and making a living for your family. Maybe, you know, sacrificing, you know, to produce. Maybe it's, you know, maybe it's worshiping God. And maybe it's respecting someone who doesn't worship the same way you worship. Maybe it's coming together and being willing to defend the right to own and control property. Maybe it's defending or coming together and believing and understanding that we have a right to trade with each other, freely trade with each other. I mean, these things, it's the land, the resources, the earth. We've talked about this. This is what Idaho is. And Idaho is not only a beautiful state, it's not only a beautiful land, but it is a beautiful idea. And I believe it's an idea of freedom. And I know that is being threatened right now. I know that we're on the verge right now of doing the very same thing that Oregon did, you know, 15 years ago. We're doing the exact same thing. The Republican, you know, the perversion of the Republican Party is basically leading us in to a cesspool of liberalism.
Yep.
And that's what's happening. So we need to decide right now, are we gonna be conservative or are we gonna be Republican? Right?
Well, the push for Greater Idaho, which would be parts of, it would be eastern Oregon and the other parts that want to secede from their states into Idaho. That's what they're hoping for, that we'll stay conservative.
And I mean, they're like the districts in the Hunger Games, right? And they're tired of being the ones just feeding the capital and watching it just eat it up and destroy itself and control everything else. That's what Idaho is not. So I don't know if I satisfied you in your answer. You kind of missed the beginning of me, and I went into more detail, but you know, that idea that rugged individualism, being able to worship, being able to, you know, decide what you're going to do with your own property, being able to use the land and resources in order for the increase to provide to provide for your family and to have a place to live. Those are all things that I believe Idaho is, and that's why I want to keep Idaho, Idaho. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Alan, for coming. I have a comment and a question. My comment, first, I want to say sorry for you and your family, what happened to you, because it hurts all of us. You're an American, we're an American. And we're all victims of these agencies that came down on you and us. Ron Paul said when he was running for 2008 candidate for presidency, he was on national television. And he always gets these weird questions, as you know.
Yeah.
But he's so overly polite. He took his 2 minutes, and then he just said, all of the alphabet soup agencies of the federal government are illegal.
That's right.
It was a pin drop. The moderators didn't know what to say until they were in a scurvy. He said, no, give me my 2 minutes. You know, Ron Paul, very polite.
Yeah.
Then he said they're all illegal because they were not voted by the House of Representatives, the House of the People. And then he tried to educate us by saying that the federal government was created by the states, who have standing, for 3 things. It was the commerce, right, between states, coining money, and protecting the borders. They were never meant to be a bureaucracy of where they're at today, our Department of Education, the EPA, they're all illegal. So I'm gonna come into my question. We've seen these lockdowns happen in the state of Idaho all throughout. And where they thought that they had the power to use their leverage was through these illegal agencies that were created by executive order through these governors. They're all illegal. That's what effectively shut us down. Now, if I recall, you have on your platform about getting rid of these agencies, which I think answers part of some of the questions here. So if you could speak on that. Also too, I'm a business owner, 28 years in Idaho. I have hundreds and hundreds of a customer base. And I'm very excited about you. Tell everybody about you. Governor Little doesn't have a chance. And also, if I can ask the second question, which started a little bit about, I think her name is McKeon. I heard one YouTube video that you had of a different town hall where you started to show her record a little bit where she didn't, you started to talk about the money trail where Governor Little, as soon as Trump made the executive order, Little came out the same day and he did it, and it was all about a money trail. And how do you say her name? McKeon was there in on the money, as she was not there for the people. So the two questions is, I believe it's on your platform, that yeah, you do want to get rid of property tax, but you also want to get rid of the executive orders that stops the turning many of us into victims. And Ron Paul, lastly, Ron Paul also says that it's through these executive order agencies where they're a bureaucracy all by themselves, you can't vote them out, that special interests gets hold inside of them, that now the fascism, the corporations take hold of us and our private property. Thank you.
I'm gonna answer it and boil it down, because the abuses to the people, the usurpations are coming from the bureaucracies. And it's these bureaucratic agencies, and these bureaucratic agencies are in the executive branch of government, on a federal and on a state level, even in a county or a city, it can be as well. So that is where the abuses and the danger are. And who are those people? They're the full-time government employees. Okay, so you have to understand, like, and a lot of it happens because they're taking funds, they're getting all these funds, they're growing, they become basically a power unto themselves. They disregard the legislature who is supposed to control them, right? The legitimate agencies. And so that is where the danger is at. That's also where the power is being held. And I've said many, many times, talking to thousands of people now, that I could go into the office of governor here in the state of Idaho, and I could not even work ever with the legislature. I would never have one legislator in my office, right? And all I do is work on stripping and minimizing and eliminating many of the powers of the executive agencies. I could do that for 4 to 8 years, never work on one law, and do the people of Idaho a tremendous amount of good. Yeah. Right? Because that's where the danger is. The Department of Health. We saw the Department of Health thinks that they can issue an order that forces the people of Idaho to stay in their homes. What?
Yeah.
I'll never live under that condition.
Department of Big
Never,
Pharma.
right?
Department
Never.
of Big Pharma, that's.
But they think that. They think that they have the authority to tell you to stay in your home.
Oh, boy.
Department of Education, right? Department of this, the Department of that, CPS, go on, and they become pretty much political tools to get what they want, right? And they're power unto themselves, and they're being funded, and then they find more ways to be funded, and then they get bigger, and it's all a big jobs program.
And
And
everybody's
it's all-
dependent on it.
Yeah, and then they make people dependent on it so that they can
Getting
justify,
corn.
yep, that's right. And it just ends up being basically a path for destruction of liberty and peace and prosperity and everything that we are in Idaho.
More than that, apparently I'm a domestic terrorist for standing up for my daughter.
That's right.
Yeah.
And who declares you that? A
Bureaucracy.
bureaucracy within
It's supposed
the
to protect
executive agency, or executive, branch of government. That's right, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I did a thing about 15 years ago. Okay, what if I told you the panhandle of Idaho was not in any enabling clause?
I already know that.
You know about Washington State then? I was the guy who sent 6 people to DC to search the National Archives, and that constitution is not in there.
Wow.
There is no enabling act for, isn't it all of Idaho? I thought it was all of
I
Idaho.
thought it was just a
Well, I know there was a divide and they were gonna wanna use into Washington and there was, all that didn't
Well,
happen.
you could undo
But I
that.
thought it was all of Idaho.
You could have power with that.
I agree, and I'd love to talk to you in detail, cause I wanna pick your brain about that, but I am aware of that. And, it would be very interesting, I have some thoughts of that.
I have the
I'll get you a number.
certified constitutions,
But let me,
the fake ones and the real ones.
that's good, let me finish, cause there was a second part to your question. What was the second part? So there's agencies,
Lieutenant Governor,
what's that?
Lieutenant
Oh.
Governor.
Well, so when we look at what's happening, and we'll wrap this up pretty soon, I appreciate your patience, we've been going for quite a while now. I think it's been a great discussion though. So, what has been happening and what is happening, in the state of Idaho, but it's happening all over, literally all over the world, is the federal government is printing money or taking it, and then they're coming down into the states and into the world, but let's just talk about Idaho. They're coming down into Idaho, and they're saying, well, Sheriff so-and-so, we'll give you $3 million, and you could use it for equipment and all of that, but you have to sign right here. And
Big
it is a
agenda.
contract.
Big agenda.
And it pushes the, environmentalist agenda, pushes all of this agenda, and they're called memorandums of understanding. They're a contract, that they'll comply. And then they bring their money, and they go to the, I don't know what your, school district's called here, but, we go to, Emmett School District, where I'm from, and they go, hey, we'll give you $1 million, we'll give you $2 million, but you have to sign here. And they have to agree to a curriculum, and they'll push it, and they'll agree to, mask mandates and vaccine mandates and all of those things. They agree, and they don't even, the federal government doesn't even know what's gonna become down the line, but they have already agreed to comply to whatever they say. And they come to the state of Idaho, hang on, let me finish, I know you're going crazy inside, right? They come down to, your county commissioners, they come to the state, to the health districts, come to Governor Little, they say, we'll give you all this, but you have to agree to pushing our, White House profiles that are coming weekly during this COVID pandemic, right? You have to agree to that.
And critical race
Right?
theory and all that.
Yeah, all of that, that's where it all comes down from, right? And the founders understood that this is the way that people are controlled. They lived it, remember? They lived it. They understood. And they said if the states and the people allow this to happen, that the federal government will take and control the land and resources, they'll take the wealth of the people into one body, then they'll trickle it down, and they'll put the states and the people into what they called undue obedience.
Wow.
And that's exactly what's happened. That's where we're at.
Fraud
So-
vitiates all.
What's that?
Fraud vitiates all.
Yeah, so we have to,
Who does it?
and as a governor, stop this flow of forcing us into undue obedience. We have to stop this
Did that
flow.
all come through the governor's office?
No. You've got little school districts contracting with the United States government in Washington DC.
How would the governor then stand in the way of that?
Well, there's a couple ways. One is it's
right to do that.
unconstitutional. It's absolutely unconstitutional. And you began to, say, look, school districts, you are not to contract. If they give you money, that's up to them, I guess. But you're not to contract. That is a violation. You're not contracting. Also, like when it comes to the schools, this isn't the case with every agency, but you come to the school and they might be receiving 96% of their funds from the state, and then the government comes in, well, let's say it'd be more like, I think it's more like, 93% or 94%, and then you got 6 or 7% coming from the federal government, right? But they still had to sign the contract, so the controls are the same. So anyway, you come along and say, look, make your decision. You want 93 or 94%, or do you want 6 or 7%? And you start throwing your weight around, stopping these things from happening. You know, you have to start educating people of what it's doing to us, how it's destroying us.
Does the governor of Idaho have the authority to override those contracts?
Well, constitutionally, if it's a violation of a constitution, the state's duty is to stop it. Right? That's the mechanism that our founders put in place. The state is the check and the balance to the federal government, right?
That would be post, not free. Both ways?
Well, so when you're talking about a contract, I got you here, let me make this statement.
I wanted to add something to that.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Chief Executive Law Enforcement Officer of the state, we have a duty to, right?
Yeah, there would be a duty there, absolutely, and in fact, you're talking about, you know, the ability to have, or to stop contracts. And there's gonna be a legal battle there's gonna be a fight there.
Okay.
All of this is gonna be a fight.
It's a fight.
Well,
All of it.
Life is a fight right now.
Right, all of it is gonna be a huge fight. I mean, none of this is gonna be easy. There's no roses in any of this.
You know a fighter we can
That's the
elect?
truth.
I don't know, you might find somebody.
Did you say, anything about, why is Sheriff Norris so against you?
I don't really know, I've never met him, but so I don't really know that, I don't really understand that, you know.
There's that thing that happened at the fair.
Yeah, I heard about that, it was, you know, actually, Bob and Kathy were involved in that, so might ask them, I really don't know. But I guess he was upset that we had a booth at the county fair, you know, he said a bunch of things and really interesting, I don't know. It concerns me about who he is, but I don't really know, I can't say one way or
Maybe
the
he
other.
lost the hog contest or
Yeah.
something.
I don't know.
That's concerning.
So,
He wouldn't join the constitutional sheriffs either, with Sheriff Mack.
that's.
Another chameleon, maybe, sounds like.
Keep an
Smells
eye on
like.
him. Well, so, I'll answer, you know, maybe one more question, and then we probably ought to wrap this up. Any question that you have, go ahead.
Okay, I have a question of, how do we abolish that incorporation of the United States that was enacted in 1871? And that's what we're operating under, is this broken system that a lot of the public don't even know about the incorporation of the United States.
You organic ag.
Well,
1871,
The-
they flipped it, so we're like straw man down. when
Yeah,
we
I
weren't
mean,
never supposed to be.
the authority of the governor is not, you know, I don't have that authority. I mean, there's a lot of things that are
Yeah.
kind of messed up, there's some things that have been, they started, you know, in 19, you know, well, they started a little earlier than that, but they really got bad, like in the 1913, when they passed the 16th and 17th Amendment, then it kind of gave them a floodgate going in, because then they became control of the money.
Yep.
And they basically took the power out of the states to be able to have representation in Washington DC. Remember, at one time, the state legislatures decided who was going to be the senators, the US senators. And the reason that was put in place that way was because the state would send the senators who were representatives of the state. Because the states were were the ones who created the federal government. They were the one, and the federal government, those are wanting, these bureaucracies wanting to build and to control basically this country, this great country, they saw that as a huge problem because they knew that it would empower the states to control the federal government. So they got rid of it and they conned the people saying, well, you should be the one to vote for the senator, not the legislature. You should be the one to vote. And so they got rid of it and amended it in the 16th Amendment, 16th or 17th, one of the two. And now the people vote in senators, and they're no different than House of Representatives. They go up there and they're not beholden to the people or to the states. And so anyway, and then the 17th Amendment, I might have them mixed up, is where they created the Federal Reserve, and they began to tax the people directly and pull the taxes. And, you know, imagine that, before 1913 or 17? Sorry. 1913, the federal government didn't directly tax the people. Imagine that. And isn't it interesting, as soon as now they can directly tax the people is when they become predatory, when they become abusive, when they become overgrown, and I mean, all of that, right? I mean, this might be a date or a statistic that is interesting to you. When was the Federal Bureau of Prisons created? In the 1940s, I think 1946.
A debtor's prison.
Well, wait a minute. What do we do with people that committed crimes before then?
State
They
prison.
were put in jail.
Sure.
They weren't put in jail. And our jails, I mean, our jails were just little jail houses. And there wasn't people in there half the time. What do we do with criminals?
Hang them.
Yeah.
Art. But you know what we did? And I'm gonna wrap up with this, because I really do, and I'll say a few things, but you know what we did with criminals? If they stole something, what did the law require them to do? To return it plus damages. And guess what happened to that criminal once he returned it plus damages? He was free to go. He restored. But if there was a crime that he committed, such as murder, that he couldn't restore, what did the state do? They put him to death, capital punishment. It's only an unrighteous people that incarcerate individuals long term. Historically. And I'm going to give you one more figure that's going to probably not make you very happy. But the United States incarcerates almost 3 times amount of people than any other country, including China and Russia.
Right.
And Idaho incarcerates more people per capita than any other state in the union.
And it's mostly victimless crimes. And I didn't.
Those are people that move over from Washington, I heard.
That's right. So what does that say about Idaho, though?
Yeah.
What does that say about our criminal justice system? What does that say about what we need to do? We have to go back to the principles that our country was founded on, the principles that work. We have to go back to them. We have to go and enforce the jurisdiction of our governments and their authority.
Amen.
And we have to start doing what works. We have to start doing what works and what we know works. And I believe if we do that, and I know that we have a great opportunity right now, we need to be full of hope. I mean, I just showed you how 3 counties can control literally who and decide in the panhandle here who's going to be the next governor. And we need to use that. Yeah.
That's an important point, because I just came to learn that in order to have some clout, you went and switched to the Republican vote. I'm independent for strategic reasons. I don't want Dominion machines, want the demographics and stuff to play with voting fraud. But in order to get to the primaries, if you could speak to that, to vote for you, everyone's gonna have to change the ticket to Republican.
That's right. I'm asking people.
So my question, so if you could speak to that, A, and also, I don't know, can after the primary, we switch back to independent for November?
Yes.
Or do we can?
Yeah, so what you need to do is you need to register Republican. You need to get everybody in your, it's just, if you wanna be pragmatic, right? If you wanna be pragmatic, then go to register Republican and actually have your voice count. And then, yeah, after you can go back being independent, and then you can vote in the generals, they're not a closed election. The Republican Party made it a closed primary in 2008. You know, good or bad, there's lots of good and bad, right? But people were able to go and just register, they didn't have, or vote, they didn't have to be Republican, and it was being abused, and now, so what do? They just register Republican, and then when they're done, they go back. And the Democrats will do that. The Democrats are very, cause they're such a minority in this state, they're very active, they have a plan, they wanna take over this state, and guess what? And I'm gonna maybe sound a little bit rude, but the rest of us are a little complacent.
Yeah.
We don't realize what we're gonna lose because of a very small group of people being very active, right?
And they're chipping away in the schools, in the individual cities, the schools are chipping away. It's like the kids that are graduating high school, they've gone through like a brainwashing thing.
Yeah, and us as parents have let that happen, and we haven't
That's right.
corrected the doctrine when they come home, we
That's
haven't
the
spent the
truth.
time. You know, we're getting up, the alarm clock, we're going to work, we're working, we come home, we sit in front of the TV, hey, they come, you know, we go to bed, we wake up, we do it again. And we're allowing people to educate our children that
A lot
somehow
of the teachers
worshiping
here-
God is bad.
A lot of the teachers in these border towns from Washington, the actual teachers live in Washington and come over
That's
here.
interesting.
Their license plates and teachers'
Well,
parking lots are Washington.
Go ahead, and I need to wrap this up.
It's based on this note because reading a lot, whether it be Ron Paul or other commentators, that they're actually taking illegal aliens and Afghans or whoever and trying to turn this into a blue state, right? And spread them all throughout the state in order to vote for them. So it's another strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, absolutely. They have their targets on Idaho, just like they did Colorado, just like they did Nevada, just like they did New Mexico,
Oregon.
just like they did Oregon, Washington, California. They have their target on these states, and particularly Idaho. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, I'm gonna wrap up. Rudy has a just really